in our series, but quite a few down our series of.
I think it's 9 now.
9. Well, there you go. Webinars which are really about sharing knowledge across the network that's been gained by a whole range of players in terms of supporting new entrants. And we previously had council farms, we've had landowners, we've had a whole range of people, and a lot of them has been about the practicality of supporting new entrants in terms of training, land matching, and so on. But this webinar is going in a different direction, looking at the wider system. And this was an issue that was raised in our first steering group workshop, that actually there's a certain amount that new entrants can do in terms of developing business plans, innovating, and so on, but they're still dependent on the market supply chain structures that exist as to what is possible. So that understanding that and where these come from and how they work is, I think, an important part of incubator hubs, maybe thinking about how they can key in and link into these sorts of initiatives as part of supporting new entrants. So I'm very pleased to have today Simon Platten, who's worked in the Southwest in Tamar Grow Local in terms of networks and linking up growers with markets, and Lynne Davis of the Open Food Network, who comes from the more sort of technical data systems infrastructure side of things, which can be crucial in terms of making these systems work in a way that delivers sort of the efficiency that's needed to deliver food that is at a reasonable cost, reduces wastage, all these, and matches demand and supply effectively. So I think these are really interesting aspects. So without further ado, Simon, welcome, and I'll hand over to you to start your presentation.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you for inviting me back again to talk a bit more. This time, as you've said, about markets and the way in which we support some new entrants. And here we go. So Tamar Grow Local is a community interest company, and we were founded 2007, and we're on the Devon and Cornwall border, and we were set up very much on the back of the transition movement around peak oil at the time, but the way in which issues have changed and been framed, our focus is still the same, but the way we talk about it is slightly different, I guess. Our priorities are really to engage more people with local food production and consumption, and to get more livelihood opportunities open to people to engage in food production. And we have done that by, well, essentially trying to create a parallel local food ecosystem which can address the issues created by market failure in some instances, and just kind of fill out this continuum of engagement in food production between kind of recreational engagement, moving all the way through to running a local food production business that supplies regional wholesale. And market failure has meant that there's been a breakdown in that continuum locally, at least, and I think that's a national pattern. So our focus is primarily on small scale horticulture. This is a very different scale from kind of farm scale, and often I notice these conversations have talked about commodity production, and we're really focusing on the production of commodities, if you like, but not in that at that same scale. And we're also incorporating very much the people involved in the production, the communities around the production and the consumption, the people, the communities, and the jobs and the livelihood opportunities that they create. And that's also a very important part of the local food ecosystem. So we started out by creating a lot of community projects, and then we enabled various kind of more complex projects which could enable community projects to be self-supporting, but also increase their longevity, and then also work with and extend the markets of local suppliers, local food producers. And there's a nice diagram on the screen there that I think, shows that. It started off as a Venn diagram to show that everything was connected, and that just looked like a mess. So we split it out into various different levels, and you can see a notional hierarchy to the organisation, where green is a lower level community involvement, and red is these kind of produce co-ops, routes to market, that I'll talk a bit more about now. So we're trying to encourage people to scale up from recreational activity into horticultural production. And when we saw people scaling up and existing local producers, we were looking at the markets that they were tending to use. And they were focusing on a combination of direct sales, their own veg box schemes, often going to farmers markets, and then engaging where they could with regional wholesale. And these are very much the incumbent kind of systems, and they weren't necessarily providing all the answers or satisfying the problem of enabling people to sell enough to make a living. So if we look at gate sales, direct sales, that's great that producers get the most margin from that. Obviously, there's no one else eating into the margin, into the supply chain. But the geographic reach is limited. You're relying on passing trade and a good reputation, and the volumes that you can shift aren't as high as they would be if you're engaging in other markets. Own veg box schemes are very, very popular with startup horticulturalists, but often, well, we've seen over the last 4 or 5 years, really, that there's almost a veg box saturation, that veg box schemes are very conscious of their territories, and they're nudging up against each other, and there's negotiated territories of where people will supply, and often people flip between one veg box scheme to another, and on the boundaries, as it were. And in order to be competitive, we saw that small-scale horticulturalists were buying increasingly from organic wholesale in order to supplement their produce, concentrating on a few items of produce to go into their boxes. And so the diversity of local production was shrinking in order to be financially competitive, and the existing incumbent wholesale system was again asserting dominance, and you weren't necessarily getting the scaling up of local production that we would like to have seen. And then often also people were going to farmers markets. Farmers markets are great, but you have to sell an awful lot of produce in order to make them work. And we were seeing, when we were going to farmers markets, people were very, well, they didn't balk at paying £3.50 for a cup of coffee and a pasty, but they would balk at paying an appropriate price for a bunch of carrots. And that meant that, well, people were going for a day out rather than their groceries, and the grocery shopping was still happening from things like supermarkets. Maybe they were buying treats, but what you wanted was people doing their regular grocery shopping in order to get the kinds of volumes that are needed from those markets. And then regional wholesale was another route that people were taking, but their experience of regional wholesale was that they found them more to be a competitor within the supply chain, as opposed to someone who was supportive. That there was always a competition between the primary producer and the wholesaler over how much margin each would be taking out of the sale. We also heard stories of payment terms which were extended over a period of months, so you couldn't, it made problems in terms of cash flow for the primary producer. And often wholesalers were paying for the wastage out of what they were paying the primary producer. Sorry, distracted there. The problem with the wholesale was that they're trying to maximize their own efficiencies, and they're having to make their business work as well. And it was this idea of competition rather than mutual cooperation, which was the problem. So we wanted to sort out a model which could foster cooperation, and which could alleviate some of the disadvantages of the previous supply chains that I've just mentioned. So initially we looked at some produce cooperatives in the Tamar Valley. We noticed that gate sale prices for honey in particular have been driven right down. There'd been an influx in new beekeepers, and they were all trying to sell their honey at the gate, and it was pushing the price right down. So we collectivized a group of beekeepers. We put together a shared label, and we started selling the honey under a shared label, but with complete traceability back to the individual beekeeper. And that worked rather well. It meant that we could build additional continuity of supply and volume to go into markets that they weren't able to access individually. And it's a kind of standard tale of the benefits of collectivizing and cooperation, which farmers co-ops are quite a familiar story. You can also share equipment purchase and sharing equipment so that each individual producer doesn't have to make their own potentially risky financial investments into kit. And that worked very well. We then started looking at apple juice. And this is an interesting parallel, perhaps. There's been a lot of promotion of people, encouraging people to plant orchards, particularly with heritage varieties, and lots of orchards were being planted, but very little thought had gone into what would actually happen with all the apples when the trees started producing. And we wanted to set up an apple juice cooperative, which would be able to pay a suitable price to incentivize people to keep the orchards rather than grub them up. And that's something that we've done. But both of those are routes to market, which are it's pretty much extensions of what we see as being traditional now. We wanted to do something else, which was going to be a little bit more innovative. And so we started doing a shared market stall at farmers markets where we could bring several producers' produce together. And that would extend their geographic reach, give them a continual presence at a farmer's market. If they were maybe going to a different farmer's market, we could do a separate one. And also for those that didn't want to attend farmer's market, it would relieve them of the burden of standing there talking to people and selling produce, which for some growers in particular isn't really why they got into growing. So we're kind of relieving the burden of that end of the business from producers to allow them to produce more and increase production. That worked really well, but within the space of a year, we had too many producers, not enough stall space, and it wasn't shifting enough volume to make it worthwhile. So we took the whole thing online and initially started the online farmers market, the food hub model, using the Stroudco model, which was previously in existence. And then we shifted to the Open Food Network when that became available. Essentially, it's a great online platform. It looks similar to an online supermarket, but we like to call it an online farmers market because each of the producers has their own profile and their own presence online, and they basically have a web space platform shop front where they can display their produce, and we essentially collate all the orders and manage the delivery. We started that, it's been going 7 years, we started that with 8 producers, and we're now incorporating over 60 local producers supplying that hub on a weekly basis. And this week we have a staggering 1,969 different product lines to manage. And the way in which we do it, we are able to pay essentially 85p in the pound of the retail price back to the primary producer. So they set their prices and we add on an 18% markup. And obviously the difference between markup and commission, that works out as 85p in the pound back to the primary producer. And we also buy in organic wholesale dry goods from Essential, and then we put an additional markup on that, and that cross-subsidizes the markup that we need to put on the local production, so that we can, in effect, run the whole enterprise as a not-for-profit and pass as much of the benefit back to the primary producers as we can. And this is essentially a regular weekly online farmers market, which has a far greater reach than a local in-person farmers market. And it has the added benefit that there's minimal wastage. So it's a just-in-time model, essentially. What happens is the producers load on their stock availability, and customers then view it, fill a shopping basket, complete their order. On a Tuesday morning at the moment, we close the shop, we aggregate all of the orders, and the system emails out to the producers so they know exactly what they've got to harvest, bake, pick, fillet, and then bring to us ready for delivery on a Friday. So we get the produce in on a Thursday and we pack it into boxes. You can see there a picture of my colleague Rachel packing some of our Friday orders, and we pack them and they all go out for delivery on a Friday afternoon. And that means we're not holding any stock. Because we're not holding any stock, we don't have to factor in the cost of wastage. And the producer is only bringing to us or harvesting what has been pre-sold, so the rest can stay in the ground or go to other markets. So this, as a supply chain, is a minimal wastage in terms of the produce. Because the producers set their own prices, essentially, they manage their own profiles. They have far greater agency in the system than they would in a traditional wholesale system. And one of the beautiful features of the Open Food Network is that there's a little pie chart next to the pricing of all the items. And if you click on that, it shows you exactly how much money from the retail price is going to the primary producer, how much to the food hub, and how much for distribution. So all the pricing in the supply chain is completely transparent. And ultimately, it creates better returns for the primary producers. It works really well. But we've been, due to the pandemic, the demand for this kind of service has gone through the roof. And we were always very careful to balance our supply and our demand very carefully. So we didn't perhaps promote ourselves as much as we could, knowing that there wasn't the volume of local production available to satisfy that demand. And then suddenly our demand spikes by 500%, and we have to scale up. And rather than relying on regional wholesale, some of which was not as agroecological as we would like, shall we say, we wanted to purchase, where we could, additional capacity from larger scale organic and agroecological growers, but also tap into our neighbouring food hubs to pick up any of the surpluses they might have from their producers, to also share producers across a number of food hubs. One reason for doing this is a food hub catchment might be around 20 to 30 miles in terms of deliveries, and within that catchment there might not be enough in the way of local customers to support a specialist producer, and a specialist producer might need a wider catchment. And so in the Tamar catchment, for example, we didn't have anyone producing organic chickens, but over near Sidmouth there is a really good organic chicken producer, and we wanted to be able to tap into their supply chain, basically. So we have been developing a pilot. We've run a pilot now, which is of the Southwest Good Food Network, which networks 4 online farmers markets like ourselves. So there's ourselves, Tamar Grow Local, Tamar Valley Food Hubs, and the Apricot Centre in Dartington, Good Food Exeter in Exeter, and in my backyard just around Sidmouth. And essentially what we're doing is sharing producers, so that producers from one hub can subscribe to another farmer's market, and we'll have a shared distribution system which moves the produce to the hub just in time for delivery. And it essentially adds to the benefit of supplying a local food hub by increasing the geographic range and the volume of produce that you can sell. But crucially, this is almost a halfway house between wholesale and retail sales. What we're doing is increasing the volume of retail sales to the extent that they're almost wholesale quantities, but without having to factor in the discount in margin by supplying a wholesaler. So it really does increase the benefits to the primary producer. Again, it's got transparent distribution costs. We've taken a bit of a finger in the air and put a 10% levy for moving produce around in terms of the pilot, just to be able to get some data to work out how better to do this. And that is then displayed on the food hubs, on the Open Food Network, as a distribution fee. And what this does is it still results in the prioritization of local production. So on a food hub where a local supplier is, say, has a product, say strawberries from the Tamar Valley, strawberries from Dartington would be 10% more expensive because they've got the added distribution fee. And what this does is it makes the cost of transportation transparent, and prioritizes then local production above production from further afield. We really quite like that. Often we find in supply chains that the cost of distribution is completely hidden and obfuscated, and can result in very quirky pricing. And in this way, we're able to hopefully tell an appropriate story to our customers about where food is coming from and how it's moved around, and how producers may benefit from that. By sharing suppliers as well, we're able to extend the season. So Tamar Valley has an earlier season marginally earlier than producers in Exeter, but that extra 2 weeks is an extra 2 weeks of supply, which is really quite useful to local customers. So it increases the resilience of the food hub, it increases the benefit to the primary producers, and it creates a resilient, local, transparent system. We really quite like it. I'm going to hand over to Lynne to talk a bit more about the data and the tech side of things, but I'm sure there'll be questions later on. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Simon. Do you need to stop sharing your screen so I can share mine? My face is giant.
Have I stopped sharing it now?
I believe so.
Good. Right.
Oof. Okay, good luck to me. Is this presenting properly? Looks like it. Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, thanks. I feel introduced. My name's Lynn from the Open Food Network. And yeah, I just wanted to chat a little bit about the kind of supply chain infrastructure that can support new entrants. And I think, yeah, I think that it's quite an underserved kind of area, and hence we've been doing quite a lot of work as the Open Food Network. We recognize that distribution logistics and a lot of the supply chain costs can be the most expensive part of running a kind of more diverse food enterprise, shall we say. So so that's the kind of thing that we're looking to maybe see where better collaborations and better infrastructure can support that to be more efficient. So what we kind of recognize is that a lot of new entrants, you know, barely any new entrants are coming in for the money, right? They're coming in for a diverse range of other reasons. Often that's a kind of about doing meaningful work, about doing something that has like an ecological value, something which is building community, something which is maybe creating more diverse small businesses within our economy, and transforming the food system. So the way that I like to think about this is that it's about kind of stewarding diversity, and that diversity happens across all aspects of our lives, stewarding diversity on the land and communities and our economy. To me, that kind of encapsulates some of the ideas here. So as the Open Food Network, our mission really is to kind of support this. We're very much building a platform that is open source. We're building it as a commons. It's used by 19 different countries around the world, and dozens and dozens of food enterprises across the UK who all run very different kinds of food enterprises. And this diversity, I think, is key, because when you're running a small food enterprise, you need to kind of leverage a lot of the local assets to your area. You need to be really flexible and kind of take advantage of the opportunities that exist. You know, it's not just the businesses that kind of need this, but it's also that to produce in an agroecological way, we really need to be supporting this. Under agroecological food production, harvests are likely to be smaller and more diverse and more regular throughout the year, with a variety of different crops that need a different range of distribution networks. Some of them maybe with a local market, some of them a bit more niche that need to be distributed further afield. That kind of diversity really needs to be supported from the farm gate onwards. Otherwise, we're not creating the infrastructure that supports this agroecological shift that I believe we all recognize we need to make. And so, yeah, that's what we really focus on with the platform, kind of supporting these diverse range of businesses. And there's a kind of a list of some of them there. But one thing that they tend to have in common, not always, but often, is that there's an aggregation element of bringing in multiple producers and coordinating some kind of collaboration around distribution, logistics, packing, fulfillment, this kind of stuff. Yes. So, yeah, I mean, what we find often is that when it comes to distribution logistics, a lot of smaller producers and kind of more community facing or socially oriented food enterprises, they manage their own logistics because the market offering doesn't really meet their needs. Often it's either too expensive to access, or we hear a lot of stories of where actually, you know, the affordable options don't really meet needs in terms of HACCP and food safety, and it has a real reputational cost to the business. Often these businesses are really kind of working on their relationships. Their customer relationships are possibly more important here than other kinds of food businesses. And so any kind of lacking in the distribution logistics really hits hard. and so people take on that on themselves. But at the same time, last mile distribution is expensive. It's expensive not just for, you know, financially, but also environmentally. There's a real benefit to scale here by coordinating distribution logistics collectively. So we're kind of stuck in this catch-22. Like, we need things that are of a scale to create financial and ecological affordability, but we need things to have these kind of trusted networks. They need to deliver to the needs, and they need to do it at the right price. And it's really challenging problem that tends to kind of be one of the downfalls of a lot of these smaller food businesses struggling to get the costs right when it comes to distribution logistics. So we've been thinking at the question of what kind of infrastructure can help to enable this diversity of businesses, this diversity of farming practices and agroecological methods. How can we enable that diversity to scale so that we can get the kind of ecological and financial efficiency? So we've done a bit of research around this. We've been looking at and interviewing different actors in the supply chains who are working in this, focusing on small businesses, but by small, I mean, you know, anything from a part-time livestock farmer who's doing a distribution route, you know, that kind of has him visiting customers and staying with friends, all the way through to maybe national fish distributor who has, you know, multi-million-pound turnover enterprise and a team of people, and just kind of exploring what are the different needs of all these different actors. And they're incredibly diverse. You know, for some people, this is a lifestyle choice to engage in farming, do a distribution route. It is also an income, but it's a lifestyle choice too. And that does need to be recognized as well. You know, there's, say, for a small dairy, the need to get the glass bottles back is really important. It's important for that customer relationship and the reason people choose them as a service. But there's a circular economy kind of aspect to this that is not well served by traditional logistics market offering. And yeah, kind of this, I mean, the needs fundamentally just incredibly diverse, but if we can't start to hold some of this complexity, then we're just not going to be able to enable this to scale. So we did a little bit of work exploring the Southwest Good Food Network and kind of just trying to map it out a bit. So I've got a few images here that paint a bit of a picture of how it works, how the pilot has worked so far. So yeah, these are the different food hubs involved. Some of them on the Open Food Network, some of them on Boxmaster, so a couple of different software platforms being used. So this is a map of the producers across the region that are supplying. And these producers then feed into these hubs dotted around the region. These hubs then have the kind of wholesale van, the Southwest Good Food Network van linkage, which travels between the hubs, swaps the produce between them. And then this is, did I just skip a slide? Okay, skipping slides. How do I go back? How does that work? Yes. Yeah, and then it's distributed out to customers within those geographic regions. And you can kind of see, particularly around Exeter and Plymouth, kind of a bit denser populations there, and wider geographic regions of going into rural areas, like in my backyard over here. So what do we realize from investigating this? Definitely, there's a real kind of theme that data exchange can be a real enabler for these kind of networks. So sharing data from different producers across the network, including like stock levels and descriptions and things like this, meant that it was much easier for producers to access this network, and particularly the producers that needed to have a bigger distribution region because their products were more niche than, say, you know, a veg box scheme locally. Poultry producers are a good example, selling organic chickens, which tend to be a more expensive product when they're produced well. Yeah, it means that the stock information can be easily transferred between, so that you're not kind of logging into all these different platforms and then managing that with your own farm system and trying to juggle where the stock is going in different places. It means that the logistics, distribution logistics can be coordinated over this area. You know, when the data was easily shared, it was really possible to kind of optimize distribution and coordinate more easily between all the different vans and vehicles and things that were going out. And then also kind of sharing sales data meant that there was a lot of transparency that could happen, and that data was able to be shared in a way that was kind of trusted and appropriate, so no inappropriate data sharing. And when that data couldn't be shared, there was this exponential increase in the complexity, huge admin overheads that were added, and it basically just meant a lot more time was taken trying to make these things work. So this pattern really started to emerge of data exchange being an enabler. And one thing that we've been thinking about is what this data exchange looks like as an infrastructure. So data interoperability is a pretty hot topic right now. I'm sure many people are aware. Food Standards Agency, for example, are looking at what data interoperability across the supply chain looks like. And one thing, you know, we kind of see this akin to the motorway network or some other kind of mass infrastructure that you know, the individual users aren't necessarily responsible, but everyone benefits, and the number of kind of diverse. Oh, hello. Someone's talking. I'll continue because I'm nearly done.
Sorry, Lynne, you're muted.
I haven't been muted the whole time, have I?
No, just now.
No.
I don't know how that happened. Maybe
I was trying to mute everybody.
Oh.
Apologies.
I was like, I didn't press that. Awkward. Cool. Yeah, nearly done. So yeah, this data exchange as an infrastructure. I guess one of the big questions that we're looking at is how to ensure that actors of different scales are involved is as this infrastructure starts to develop. Right now, the infrastructure is really being developed by the existing large actors, and it's kind of has the potential to exclude this kind of design for diversity that we really need to be exploring if we're going to do some of the transformations to our food system that we need to make. So if anyone's interested, we've got a webinar coming up on the 7th of July. I will maybe post a link to that in the chat if anyone's interested. But that's probably enough from me, and we can, do some questions.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Simon. Thanks very much, Lynne. I don't know where the extra noise is coming from, because I'm looking, everyone seems to be muted.
Yeah, I've muted everybody now, so there shouldn't be any more extra noise.
Great. So I'm now open to questions. So if you can put your electronic hand up to ask questions. Sarah, you can unmute yourself and go for it.
Hi there, I'm Sarah. I work in DEFRA, head up the Farming Productivity and Innovation teams, and work with Henry on the new entrant scheme. Thanks for that talk. It was really interesting and great to see the work that you're doing in Devon. I grew up roughly where you're talking about, so I'm a bit sad that I can't tap into your, now moved away, but sad that I can't tap into your veg boxes. So my question was, you mentioned in the presentation about use of co-ops. How important is it to have the sort of legal structures around that support the coming together of growers? And is that needed, or is it something that growers can tap into on a less formal basis? And what support there is for that in terms of collaboration?
May I answer that one first? There's quite a lot to say on this one. So we started with the honey co-op and the apple juice co-op with the intention that we would start it off and nurture it to a point which it could be floated off and run by its members. And this hasn't necessarily happened because perhaps we've done been a bit too efficient at running it. But we had very much in mind the legal structure of a bona fide co-op in mind for those organisations, and we had drawn up all the membership agreements and the supply contracts and everything in preparation for that. And it was of key importance in our mind that the producers have the adequate level of protection that they may hopefully not need, but they are prepared for it in the future. And they might not even recognise that they need it and might prefer not to engage with it in the outset, but history does say that, that it's very important to have. In the Tamar Valley, we've had historically three large cooperatives with various lifespans, and one of them went under, owing a number of its members some money, and this kind of almost soured the ground for the start of another cooperative around vegetable production when we were starting up. And we were very mindful that we had to be very careful how we talked about a cooperative model. And this is one reason why the Open Food Network is a really strong model, because when we were talking to producers around the cooperative model, they were seeing it as a kind of a dilution of their own identity and a dilution of their own business that they had spent particularly a large amount of energy developing. Where on the Open Food Network and other platforms that do similar things, the producers are able to maintain their own identity and their own business sovereignty, for want of a better word, where they can decide which markets to supply, and it's entirely up to them. But by cooperating, they're able to achieve the economies of scale and benefit from working together, having increased continuity of supply and volume and reach, and essentially sharing things without detriment to their own business. And it really is about mutual support and downplaying, if anything, mutual reliance, because people don't necessarily, when they've worked really hard on a business, want to be reliant on another business that they may see as being less strong. So we were very careful to organise the food hub on those lines, talking about mutual support and economies of scale rather than cooperation as a bona fide cooperative. And that was partially because of the things about the historical co-ops in the valley, but also because we recognised that the beekeepers, for example, didn't want to run their own co-op because they wanted to concentrate on their own businesses and they thought we were doing it better. So in many ways, whilst it's important to have all the legal protections in place for bona fide cooperatives and other forms of collaboration, the way in which there are ways of doing it to get the same benefits without necessarily having a cooperative model, a formal cooperative model. And I say that with a little bit of reticence because I'm a really big fan of the cooperative model. but that's the way we've decided to go.
But I suppose it's interesting because maybe the spirit is possibly as important as the formalities. Maybe is that right?
Yeah.
And I wonder actually, it's because there are sort of complaints, aren't there, amongst other people that they don't know what's happening with their contracts and they feel controlled and don't have a say. Does that feed into people wanting to have more of a knowledge of what's going on and more of a say over the contracts and so on?
Well, the producers we deal with are at a scale where perhaps contracts to supply aren't as common as they would be at larger scales. But when we're talking to producers, what seems to be a common theme is they want to be able to control their lives and their businesses, and that's entirely fair and right, and they should be able to do so. And if we're creating an attractive platform to sell, an attractive market to sell through, that is providing the benefits that we all want to see in terms of local supply chains, better use of resources, reduced food miles, greater agroecological production. If we're able to achieve those benefits without necessarily compromising the control and sovereignty of businesses, great. it may be that a cooperative model is necessary at a different scale. I'm only really familiar with the scale at which we're operating. I can see that at a larger scale, you may want to have a contract system purely to be able to protect and better predict the amount of stock you've got coming through. So I think how applicable it is as a model will depend largely on the granularity of the point of view. Not sure that answered your question. But.
Never mind. That's good for me. Any other questions?
Henry, if I may. Hi, thank you. That's really great presentations on both parts. I'm pleased to know that I know Marina from Apricot Centre. I guess she's doing well there, and Bob if he's there. So it's really nice to have that connection. My question is, it might be a slightly strange one. I'm just wondering, you alluded, I think Simon, you alluded to things like sharing of cost, machinery and so forth. And I'm wondering, between the two of you, have you thought about the opportunity, would this work in reverse, that the Open Food Network might work to aggregate supplies and inputs into those producers, so you would get some of the machinery sharing, cost sharing, economies of scale in purchasing, might be packaging, might be other inputs, and whether you think that could work and what that would mean for the kind of structures you'd need to do that. So.
I mean, yeah, like it's a conversation that we tend to have, yeah, on a semi-regular basis. No one's actually doing it yet, but it's absolutely possible. It's the same kind of, yeah, the same tools can definitely do this. In terms of what's needed, I think, like, yeah, it'll certainly take a kind of governance level to coordinate between different actors. They'll need, like, one of the challenges will definitely be storage of facilities and how that's all managed, etc. But I think, like, yeah, the problem with this kind of thing tends to be more around governance and getting everyone to cooperate and being able to operate in that way, more than it is a problem with kind of the underlying tech. So certainly we can help and support and do that. I think it's a really powerful thing, particularly when, yeah, that facilitation role that takes quite a time to bring everyone around the table, get everyone agreeing on how it's going to work. That needs to be supported for it to happen. And when everyone's trying to kind of patch it together, often that's the kind of thing that falls down a priority list. Mm-hmm. So I'd love to see more of that.
One question I might have is, in terms of the sort of growers, are we all talking all horticulture, or are we talking in the network, are we talking farmers who might be doing other stuff but also you know, selling their livestock into networks and stuff? I mean, how diverse are the sort of sets of people who interact with the old networks?
May I just go first?
Yeah.
The 60 odd producers that we have supplying the hub at the moment, 25 of those are growers. The rest are secondary producers adding value to local produce and other produce from further afield. And it also includes meat and dairy, fresh fish landed in Loo, just down the road. And yeah, so it's across the sector. We've got local meat, local dairy. Not so many meat producers, because there's less volume in terms of the retail sales to support multiple meat producers, but it's certainly a model which could work for coordination of a bioregional meat brand, for example, or something like that, feeding into the same system, in my view.
And is this, could this only happen in the southwest, or are you looking at it happening elsewhere in the country?
So, I mean, as the Open Food Network, we are nationwide, only one food hub in Northern Ireland, but other than that, we've got a pretty good spread across the UK. Yeah, so maybe just touching on the veg point, what we find is that a bit under 50% of all the produce sold through the network is veg. I think people are kind of, that tends to be a kind of anchoring point where shoppers are looking for good veg. Veg is often something that's easier to make affordable. Supermarket veg is actually quite expensive, you know, so it's easier to make it affordable. But then all the produce that surrounds that, it makes up about 50% of what's sold through the network. One of the challenges that this creates is that like the distribution regions are different for different kinds of produce, as Simon's just alluded to. You know, meat it's a higher value product, people eat less of it. So if you're creating a kind of distribution network around your veg production, then it doesn't quite overlap perfectly with the type of distribution region that's required to sell more the niche products or the more expensive products like meat, which is why this kind of linking between food hubs of the Southwest Good Food Network is such an effective model to expand that distribution network while still leveraging it. It's kind of a subsidiarity type model, you know, like the distribution it scales to where it needs to be. Yeah.
But are you doing similar things elsewhere nationally, or is this exceptional, this Southwest system?
The Southwest Good Food Network is the main, let me think. I mean, we have there's various examples. So one of our fish producers sells through loads of different food hubs on the platform, and they do that tapping into couriers, like existing courier networks. So people are kind of figuring out how to make it work, but we're certainly exploring more places where the Southwest Good Food. I think one of the advantages of the Southwest is that there is a higher density of smaller farms and smaller producers. So actually, there are more suppliers to supply the food hubs across the Southwest. And the Southwest, there are a lot of different food hubs across the Southwest that are keen to join in this network as well. So I think even if it does start there and spread out from there, it has the potential to grow fast. The pilot continues.
Brilliant. More questions from the audience? Christine.
Hi, yes. I was just wondering, those of us involved in food production, we obviously have to conform to food assurance standards and things like that. Do you have your own standards that you impose on your members, or is the fact that you're a local food network, does that actually satisfy the consumer anyway?
That's a really interesting one. So we wanted to encourage agroecological production from the outset, but we really wanted to bring all local producers with us. So we didn't make a distinction between agroecological, organic, or conventional. We prioritized local. And when producers sign up to our food hub, we have a minimum set of standards, which includes the Red Tractor. But we've also been working with the local Rivers Trust to work out and promote food production techniques which contribute to better water quality. And so whilst we don't necessarily have our own mark or brand, and we don't ask people all to be organic and basically delegate responsibility of that to another certifying body, we do have a minimum set of standards which we ask people to sign up to, and we do try and pull levers wherever we can to try and promote more sustainable food production wherever we can. It is difficult because a lot of the growers in particular are fairly small scale, and it's not economically viable to currently to get organic certification, for example, even though they may be doing their utmost to grow in an organic way. And we didn't want to penalize them by adopting a certification mark that was then a barrier to small scale new entrants often getting into the sector.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else? Graham.
You're muted.
Sorry, when I was just going to say a quick comment if I may. When we did work at CPRE on local food, there was always this question about definition. So I think there's something very elegant about this linkages, about getting away from the challenge about local versus regional. And it almost seems like you've got a working model of the proximity principle, which I think Joy Carey came up with. And that to me is very interesting, because I just wonder if you want to comment on that, or whether that's something that's very clear to your customers as well, and do they worry about what local means? I know you made the point, Simon, about that distribution charge, which is a really neat way of making that, through the transparency, making it clear to people what they're buying and where it is, and what and you know, the subsidiarity structure of that.
I think it is important to our customers where their food's coming from. A lot of them are shopping. We had some work done by I forget which university it was, looking at the diversity of our customers and which demographics they fall into. It was pretty much across the board. What united them was a community of interest rather than a community of income bracket, and it was a community of interest around food provenance and food procurement generally. And these kinds of issues came to the fore. We perhaps don't do enough to talk about the transparency mechanism on OFN, and that's something that we would do more of, I think, in the future, to particularly if we're able to make more use of the Southwest Good Food Network. It's very much in pilot stage at the moment. We're not sure if we can continue it, but if we can, that's definitely going to be part of the story we want to tell, to make the distribution charges more transparent. And yeah, the idea of the proximity principle, food sheds in general, consuming things that are closer first, is certainly what the food hub that we wanted our food hub to be about, really. So
thanks.
Do you, out of interest, as well as proximity, are your customers interested in the sort of environmental dimension generally, or not so much? And if they are, do you inform them, because it seems, you know, suppliers may be varied in terms of whether they're ecological or not, or to the extent, do you inform people about that? Do people know so they can choose brands with more environmental benefits?
Well, and again, it's built into the Open Food Network system. So each producer has their own profile on the system, and they manage that alongside their stock levels. So they get to tell their own story about their business and their production system. And largely we leave it to them to tell that story, but we try and have a number of events as often as we can, not many recently, where we can tell the story about sustainable production and the need to increase that. And we have a regular newsletter that goes out which raises these issues. So I think we do talk about it to our customers. They certainly want to hear more about it. Many of them are already converted towards looking for that. And so I think yes, they do want to see it, and yes, they do get to find it because of this facility on the Open Food Network for producers to tell that story.
Right.
It's an interesting one, maybe just to add quickly that it does build into these models some interesting challenges, because you know, some people are looking for that story. For other people, that story almost is an exclusion, like, oh, that food's not for me. I think we carry quite a strong food identity with us, all of us, whether we mean to or not. Some people talk about this as, like, you know, free range eggs being a beautiful example of how food identities can change. Suddenly people became people who chose free range eggs. Yeah, but I think it poses a really interesting kind of exploration around what it means to tell a story that suits lots of people, while still putting these messages in around, you know, about the kind of environmental and social benefits. And it's one that I think Tamar do quite well. I feel like a lot of these kind of food enterprises go through a bit of a struggle with that, hammering a point a bit too hard. So it's an interesting journey people take.
Interesting. And overall, are you still growing after this huge growth due to the pandemic? Is there been ongoing growth?
Well, we were looking at this the other day. So we had this huge spike in demand, and that was associated with the scrabble for supermarket online delivery slots. And so our demand went through the roof at that point, and we had to close the order book at sort of 300% growth. And orders have dipped again now, now that the things are opening up again, but we're still ahead of where we were. Since we started the hub, we've had steady incremental growth year on year, and that growth has been exponential, but not hugely so. And if we were to look at our current order levels and take the blip in demand out of the picture, we're essentially a year ahead of where we were in terms of our steady incremental growth. So the pandemic seems to have boosted us by a year in our existing growth trajectory.
Brilliant. Andrea?
I was just wondering, actually, I'm part of the very new hub that's been set up in Preston. We haven't really started yet. We had a very sort of soft launch on Saturday as part of their very first repair cafe as well, just sort of talking to people and selling a little bit of veg. I'm a grower, and I was just wondering, actually, when things start to really sort of go forward with the Preston hub, I'm trying to figure out, I mean, I'm just one of the team, really. Who gets paid? Who gets paid to run the hub? So really, my sort of very blunt question, probably to John, would be, as your hub as an example, how many people are employed by the hub?
Sorry, yeah, I wondered who you meant by John, and I remembered that my software systems named me John, thanks to one of our directors purchased.
I was confused about that.
It is Simon, yeah. So
it is Simon, yeah.
Well, Tamar Grow Local staff are all paid, and the food hub generates enough of a surplus through charging its 18% markup after paying for software and overheads and everything to pay its staff. So the food hub does pay for itself. We do have a number of other businesses alongside the food hub, and collectively they're mutually supporting, but the food hub does pay for itself.
How many employees do you have? Are they full-time staff, or do you have part-time people?
Well, we're mostly part-time. We've got one full-time, 6 part-time, and then drivers and people that come in and help on a casual basis.
Yeah, sure.
Depending on how the orders are that week. But we've got a substantial team. Yeah.
Could I ask again? Sorry, I'm just kind of, these are just coming really as soon as I've got you. So what's the sort of distribution of labour? You know, are those part-time staff mostly sort of packing orders to go out, or what sort of?
Yes, it's mostly picking and packing orders, but there's something to do every day of the week. And I think that's the main difficulty with startup food hubs, is having someone available at the critical points across the week, because they need to be available to do that. And we manage that because we've got lots of other things going on, that once you've done that one bit of work for the food hub, you can crack on with something else.
Yeah.
If you're just focused on a food hub, then you can crack on with something else, but it's not necessarily related to the food hub or even that sector. It might be something else entirely. So, and I think that's one of the strengths of having a multifaceted organisation like ours, where you can get that economy of scale by having lots of different things going on, which means that there's someone there dedicated to answer the phones at any point in the working week, and you've got that continuity.
Yeah.
there's a whole range of business models that you can explore. In fact, the world is your oyster. And we have on our YouTube channel as the Open Food Network some videos about different business models, different structures, things like that. So maybe take a look there. There's more to say.
Brilliantly. We are running out of time now. So I am going to have to close it down because people will need to leave. So I'll just say thank you very much, Simon and Lynne. That was really fascinating, and it's a fantastic stuff you're doing in the Southwest, and great to share that. So that's fantastic. Now I'll just ask Catherine, what's next week? What have we got next week?
So next week we actually have Lynne back, but she'll be representing as one of the directors of the ecological cooperative, just speaking about their work with new entrants. So yes.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Lynne, for for coming back and talking about that. We'll look forward to that. Okay, and I hope other people manage to make it for next week. And I hope you found this really useful and interesting. And have a very good rest of the day. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Bye.